Welcome back. We are here and we continue on in our study of time management for pastors. This goal of effectively managing our ultimate resource, those limited minutes and hours and days which the Lord has given us. I'm so glad you continue on in this course because I truly believe that this will help and encourage you as a pastor to become a more godly leader of God's people. So if this is very, very, very important. And as we continue to consider how we do this, I hope that you're encouraged as we go through these topics. Just a brief overview again. Reminder that we went through the weekly planner last week and the last session. And this session focuses on the importance of a weekly assessment. And that is a difficulty that we all have to touch upon in our life and ministry. We very frequently move forward or plow forward without really thinking about what happened before, what happened last week, what happened in the past month, what's been successful, what's been unsuccessful, or worse yet, we want to think about that, but because we don't have a good algorithm or way to think about that productively, we just wind up kind of complaining about the sense of helplessness, hopelessness, or a lack of personal control or responsibility that we have. And that's what we're trying to get away from, is this importance of being a responsible person. And it answers this important question: how can we not live like an animal? I love this little picture here because it shows this cat who's staring mindlessly into their screen, just as we often stare mindlessly into possibly our screens, but also just going through life like an animal goes through life, right? Not specifically or personally interacting and thinking about how we're going to invest in our time and how we're going to prioritize those things which are most important, but we just kind of let life happen to us. And that is not an effective way of living. I would argue that's not even a godly way of living, this passive idea of kind of the hippy-dippy, yeah, just kind of let life happen to me. Well, that is not interacting. In fact, that's becoming a slave to this world system and letting it dictate your priorities, plans, and expectations. So I hope we can grow to be more developed as being what it means, understanding and applying what it means to be created in the image of God and not live just like a passive animal who is affected by everything that goes on in our daily lives. People will crash and burn in pastoral ministry because they feel like they're just constantly reacting to what's going on, what's coming at them, rather than taking on the time to consider what's productive, what's unproductive, where we might be losing or wasting time. So this time of reflection is important. It's not self-concern or self-absorption in a negative sense. It is a positive need of every pastor because let's just face it, this is a next level type of job. A pastor is not just like a fast food worker, which all deference and respect towards the importance of that task as well. You're usually told exactly what you have to do. Well, in pastoral ministry, by and large, you will be responsible for your own time. And that means you need to take responsibility of your own time. And that means looking back at what happened again last week, last month, last year. What's going right? What's going wrong? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? Because in most cases, that's been given to us to talk about or to think about and determine to ourselves to some great degree. So this, when it comes to finding this time for consideration and for this weekly review that I encourage you to put in your week, I want to point out that should be an appointment that you keep, an appointment that you put into your schedule, because now you're keeping a planner that blocks things off. This is occupied time. Well, this is occupied time where you're going to make these weekly appointments. So write it in on your calendar, write it in on your schedule, and keep that appointment as if it was an appointment with the President of the United States or the king or governor of your country, whatever it is. Keep that as an important appointment, because if you start shuffling on that, you wind up losing effectiveness in everything and everything else. I highly recommend Sunday evenings or Mondays to be the best for pastoral schedule building. Perhaps, again, Monday evenings, if you take Monday off, all of those things might be ways in which you can fit it, but fit it in every week, right? Whatever it is. Again, I feel like it's most effective once you're done with the big kind of crescendo of the week at the weekly service. Perhaps your church doesn't meet on Sundays. Maybe you meet on Saturdays or Tuesdays or Thursdays, whatever it is. But find a rhythm that works for you whenever you feel like the week is really concluded in terms of your life and ministry. This can help avoid the Monday morning blues. The Monday morning blues is a concept that is well documented in pastors and ministry folk. It comes from this incredible exertion of energy and planning, and it all comes out on, let's say, typically, right, Sunday morning, and then all of a sudden, having worked so hard and served and preached and taught and planned, then you finally get to Sunday and you go, whoa, did it even matter, right? So taking that time, instead of just dealing with the natural kind of energy movement, flow, or energy expenditure, I'm not trying to be mystical or new agey by any stretch, but instead of being a victim to the ebb and flow of work and rest in that regard, take some time within that context to evaluate what was successful, celebrate those successes, as we'll see, and then to eliminate those things which you thought were not as successful or not as meaningful. So make that appointment and keep it. It is important. It is important that you plan and use your time effectively, and it's important that you take time to consider how that's done. So reflecting on the last week and then planning for the week to come, bringing us to our next major point, which is what constitutes an effective weekly review or a good weekly review. These three elements cannot be negotiated. You might add or subtract something from this, but making an assessment of last week, looking at a big picture assessment of your life as a whole, and finally planning what is going to come up next week, right? Those three simple steps will give you a sort of space to think about what is most effective. So, what did I do last week? We'll give you some insights into this. What did I do last week? How did last week go? How does this all fit into the big picture of my goals, dreams, and expectations? And finally, what is going to happen next week? What do I need to plan? How do I need to do? What am I able to do? What am I not able to do? What expectations upon me can I fulfill? And what do I need to change? So all of those things are very important. So let's talk about reviewing last week. I'm going to break this down into three simple points as well. This first point is meetings. You're going to have in pastoral life a great number of meetings, and you want to ask the question, were they productive? The next one is tasks. What got done and what needs to be done forwarded to the next week, right? If you're attentive during our previous session, you will remember that we talked about taking and making task lists and not just then forgetting them, but checking off the things that are done and then putting that little forward arrow on the things that didn't get done so they can get done in the next week. So what got done and what needs to be done next week, right? And why this is so important is that you might have dreams, goals, aspirations, or desires for your church family that if you don't write them down and say, I am tired of pushing that forward to the next week, I'm going to do it this week, right? It is a way to encourage yourself not to forget what's really important. Alternatively, as you write down those tasks or ideas or dreams, I want to teach a class on this, I want to write a book on that, whatever it is, then you will also over time go, that seemed like a good idea at the time, but it's not really going to be a long-term win, or it's not going to have the effectiveness. Or maybe I'm pushing that forward into the far distant future, writing it in some other brain dump notebook and setting it aside for a little while. Right? And finally, you want to do a performance evaluation. That performance evaluation is really important. Not to be legalistic, overly harsh, or perfectionist with ourselves, but rather to say, did that go well or did that go poorly? What went well about it? So if you're talking about your performance evaluation on your Sunday morning sermon or message or Bible class, whatever it is, look at that and say, what metrics can I have? What markers can I have about whether that was successful? Did I organize it well? Did I plan it well? Did I deliver well? What kept me from succeeding or held me back from succeeding well at that? What feedback did I receive from the people whom I love and trust and I've licensed in my life to give me feedback on these things? So every week needs to include a review of the previous week and figure out how we can be more successful and more valuable to the people whom we love and serve. Next, we look at big picture assessment. The big picture looks at that huge overarching reality. Are you headed towards the Lord? Are the things that you do and spend your time in a week truly drawing you and encouraging you towards greater growth in the Lord and towards His glory? That's a question you have to ask. And you might choose to just wait until you have that, pathetic drama movie moment where I couldn't sleep last night, so I spent all night, wait up in the middle of the night, blah, 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 and then I felt great. If that's the way you want to roll that way. But I'd encourage you not to. I'd encourage you to take control of that discussion and think regularly about whether or not you are glorifying Christ, whether or not you're growing towards Christ, whether or not your ministry is effectively bringing you to where you want to be, or not, right? Are you growing in Christ and improving upon your ministry? Are you becoming a more effective leader and pastor, teacher, elder for Christ, or minister or missionary? Or are you just kind of coasting along, skipping along? I would encourage you that one of God's created processes in this world is the process of growth. And it doesn't happen entirely without our voluntary movement in the process. So, every week, I think you should write down these 3 big successes. These 3 big successes will be personal, family, or church related. Okay, so you might have 2 in personal, or 1 in family, 1 in church, and so on and so forth. But whatever the case, make sure that you're writing down those things that were successful, and make sure that you're also not being overly concerned with those things that were not successful. Make sure that as you write down those successful things, that you celebrate that. Right? And that can be one of the things, is that we do something, we succeed at something, and we wind up forgetting about that altogether, right? We let the successes go by the wayside, and then we focus on the things that didn't go as well. And that is exactly what we want to avoid. There are many wonderful and successful things going on in your ministry, and you absolutely must take seriously those successes within the context of your life and ministry. So writing those things down, did you have success with your personal relationship with your family, with your wife? Did you have success within your within your devotional life? Or were there successes within your church that you need to take a moment and say, that was a win? I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna write that down. I'm gonna celebrate that. This is not ineffective. Next, you want to take a section and write about 2 or 3 lessons that you've learned. It could be a theological lesson. You learned something about the Lord. It could be a personal lesson. You learned something about the way that you deal with, the situations in life, or your personal time management successes or lessons learned. It could be a professional lesson learned, something that you've improved in your regard to that. Next, take a section and define for next week, this is forward-looking, what is going to make next week a success, with some idea towards the goals and the things that you've got to do. What are those things that are going to make you look back next Sunday or Monday and say, yeah, that was a successful week. I achieved this, or set aside this time for my family. I succeeded in keeping my devotional commitments and desires. I was able to teach effectively in this, or what hobbies or pastimes that you might take up. What is going to make you be able to look back objectively and say that this week was a good week? Right? That's what you're hoping to do, because that is the challenge in considering our time. Is oftentimes we just go based on how we feel at that express moment, and how you feel at that express moment is not usually a terribly accurate perspective on what is really made that week successful. So turning that into a concrete ability is of the utmost importance. Next section in your weekly review should be your goals for next week. Your goals should be measurable. Right? They need to be measurable in regard to the ability to say, did I succeed or fail at this? Not just abstract. They should be realistic. Your goal should not be that everyone in your city hears the gospel of Jesus Christ this week. That's absurd. That's abstract. Unless you live in a very, very, very small town, you know you won't fulfill that. So realistic and achievable goals within the context of a week are important. Next, those goals need to be meaningful, right? You don't want to make a bunch of goals that are like, I just want to finish the Peanuts comic strip this week. Well, it's not really that meaningful, right? So goals that are measurable, realistic, and meaningful for the next week are going to be of the utmost importance. Next, anything else you wish to track. I personally like to track these 3 things, so they're just there as examples. Track your exercise. What you walk? Are you someone who walks, someone who runs, someone who lifts weights or plays softball? Track your exercise. Track and see if that's valuable. Next, media consumption. Are you a person who is given to 20 hours of television watching? Well, then write down what it is you're watching. What are you putting into your brain? What are you putting in your soul? Is it YouTube videos? Is it this or that? Write that down so that you can start to be mindful of that. And finally, reading lists. What books are you reading, either theologically or otherwise? So all of those things are important ways to track the things that make up the way you spend your time. So plan next week. Plan your next week is the final section of that. You want to fill out your weekly planner, as we previously discussed. Make sure you include devotional time, exercise, big think time. Make sure you include the opportunity for you to think about what the Lord is doing in your church. It could be an hour, 2 hours would not be inappropriate to prayerfully consider what's going on, avoiding all distraction. I'm sorry, I'm not available at that time. That's my, you might not share this, but that's my big think time. That's when I think and pray about the Lord's vision for the church. Write in all your standing appointments, any other events and extra appointments that you might know of at the time. And then, most importantly, take note of those open slots in your schedule, right? We oftentimes feel busy when we're not busy because we are not taking responsibility for the time that's ours. So I encourage you to take a weekly task or make a weekly task list in this time. Again, for me, I put my calendar on the right side of the page and my task list on the left side of the page. But figure out what are your critical tasks, what must get done, your needed tasks, what will be valuable to get done, and your nice tasks. Good, but if these things don't get done, then no problem. So your assignment for this module is to complete an assessment of the previous week, right? Write down an assessment of that week, of last week, based upon all the requirements that you've taken up, right? Your assessment of last week, your big picture goals, and finally your future expectations, including your goals, your habits, and the things you'd like to do. With that, I pray that the Lord would richly bless you in your continued study and your effective use of this greatest resource that the Lord has given each of us, and that is the time which He's put forth for us. And may God richly bless you.